Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm Nathan Fink.
I'm Jolyn Drennan, and this is New Hampshire Family Now,
a show about building family in the Granite State. Today in the podcast, Jolyn and I navigate childhood social circles and laugh maybe a little too much. And later, poet, producer, performer Caleb Rainey joins us to talk difficult conversations in a commitment to the person we intend to be. New Hampshire Family Now is brought to you by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Since 1962, the Charitable Foundation has worked hand in hand with generous and visionary citizens to maximize the power of giving and support, collaborate, and lead innovative initiatives. Initiatives like New Hampshire Tomorrow, which is focused on making sure children and families have access to education, healthcare, and career pathways to ensure every family member thrives. To learn more about New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and all their initiatives, go to www.nhcf.org. This podcast was also brought to you by Family Support New Hampshire. Family Support New Hampshire is NH's coalition of family resource centers and family strengthening programs that exist to ensure Granite State families have access to resources so both caregivers and children can succeed, because supported families are strong families. To find a family resource center near you, visit www.fsnh.org. Hey, it's Nathan, co-host of New Hampshire Family Now. I wanted to take a quick break from the show because it occurred to me the other day that I've never asked you to subscribe to this podcast. Subscribing is free, and when you do it, it helps our placement algorithms, making it that much easier for caregivers across New Hampshire to find valuable information and strategies for their families. Also, you'll be alerted when a new episode drops. And if you like the show, leaving a review helps us that much more. So go to wherever you get your podcast, type in New Hampshire Family Now, and as the kids say, smash that subscribe button. I say click it, because if you smash it, then you're going to need a new one. Thank you and enjoy today's podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast after a short hiatus to rest our weary bones.
Maybe. Did you rest?
No. So obviously I am here with the Jolyn Drennan. How's the family? What are you guys working on?
Doing good. We are going through some transitions. So my husband got a promotion. So we're working through that kind of training, and he just got back from a 2-week trip. So I was single momming it for a while there.
2 weeks?
2 weeks, yep.
So how's Wiley though? Is he working on some stuff?
Yeah, he is. So he's doing well, but we are certainly navigating the kind of like social dynamics of third grade, which I didn't realize were as intense as they are turning out to be.
Wasn't House of Dragons based on third grade?
Yes, like third grade hierarchy. Yeah. So I'm just trying to help him work through some of his own like self-confidence and, kind of like new friends and maybe a little bit of like estrangement's not the right word, but just like maybe not hanging out as much with like his little core group of friends that he's had for a long time, and trying to help him understand that, because they're playing something that he's not particularly interested in does not mean that they're not friends anymore. Right. So like these very deep conversations we're having.
It's funny. You just like gave me a flashback to my grade school, where I'm thinking about like when you start having different interests and the fact that those interests dictate the people that you surround yourself with. Like, cause obviously it's not like the Shark and the Jets or something, or people, but like what's happening that is wedging these friends apart?
There are kids that like to play Foursquare. Wiley's not into it. And then there's kids that like to play tag, and he likes to play tag, but he's not super friendly with the kids that are playing that game. So it's like
handsy game tag. So what does the conversation then look like with him?
Well, it's really it's a lot of like reassurance and, letting him know that you can have different interests, and, that if he's missing his, his core friends, then like go play Foursquare one day. If you don't, even if it's not your favorite thing, and maybe just invite them to play tag. Do
you model with Tom and just be like, look, like Tom and I don't even talk anymore. So
No, but I'll try that. I'll be like, you know what? Dad likes computers and all kinds of weird stuff in the garage, and I want nothing to do. I actually want to clean it up and throw it all out. So see, but we manage.
Yeah.
So what's going on with you and Jen? What are you guys working on?
I think lately for me, I'm working on, I don't know how to describe it other than go play. Jenny used to call me the professional fun dad because I'd show up at parties and I'd be like, who wants to get some with all the kids? And we would play and play and play. And over the years, like I'm finding myself needing to step out of their play. Because I think on one level, it's their own creativity. Like I'm getting in the way of their construction, their game construction. I'm also getting more tired and I have more work to do. So I'm trying to like extract myself, but without like slamming that door. And it's really tricky because, it's been part of my identity.
I struggled with that too, because like, so Wiley was out playing this weekend and he wants to, he's all into like camping now. So he was like setting up a camp and he was like putting like a teepee together and I was looking at it and I was like, oh, it would make it so much better. And then I had to stop myself and be like, nope, that looks great. And
that's the thing too, is because on one hand, stepping in to show them what's possible is huge. But then switching to being like, now show me what your horizon looks like.
Yeah, like an opportunity.
I think, but it also comes down to the fact that I think like I'm starting to look at this thing called parenting or adulthood, just a series of phases. On one hand, you're this thing and you're this thing because everything around you tells you you must be, and you're identifying, because you've got this child. But once then they start to stand up on their own, you have this shifting identity that feels like empty nesting. Or, what are those bugs called? Like cicadas, they leave their
carcass.
Yeah.
And then go fly off.
But you know what I mean? It's like leaving the person that you thought you needed to be at that moment to be something else is difficult.
Yeah.
But you can't try to slip back into that old crusty shell.
Yeah, it's going to fall apart and probably stinks a little bit.
And when we come back, poet, producer, performer Caleb Rainey joins us. Don't go anywhere. Many thanks to New Hampshire's Office of Social and Emotional Wellness for sponsoring this podcast. Started within New Hampshire's Department of Education, the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness consolidates policy development and implements projects and programs that are focused on health and wellness with an emphasis on behavioral health of all students, youth, and families. To learn more about the Department of Education and its many programs and approaches, visit www.education.nh.gov. Today's show was also brought to you by the Children's Hospital at Dartmouth-Hitchcock and the Child Advocacy and Protection Program, a multidisciplinary program with the Children's Hospital established to evaluate and provide integrative care to suspected victims of child maltreatment. Together, a team of physicians, advanced practice registered nurses, social workers, nurses, and child life specialists work to provide consultation and evaluations of children who are suspected victims of abuse, so to serve in the best interest of children and families at multiple levels of prevention. For more information about Children's Hospital at Dartmouth-Hitchcock and the Child Advocacy Protection Program, visit www.chadkids.org/child-advocacy. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome poet, performer, producer Caleb Rainey to the show, author of Look, Black Boy and Heart Notes, and among other things, celebrated spoken word performer who uses visual performances to create conversations, consciousness, and love. Caleb, I'm thrilled. Welcome to the show.
I am very, very excited to be here.
I said before that I'm a huge fan. I kind of went into this K-hole of a little bit of internet stalking. The way you use something like visual performance to create conversations, come consciousness, come love, I want to read that is a direct line of causation, one after the other after the other. But I also think getting there can require some difficult conversations. Why are the interactions that you're creating, no matter how difficult they may be, so critical to us as people on this journey toward love?
Oh my gosh. Why are they so critical? The interactions and the conversations we have are exactly how we grow and learn who we are and what we care about. And by doing so, that's the way that we better treat the ones we love, because we know we love them. But part of it is having those hard conversations and really making yourself uncomfortable and really addressing the things that matter. It's a thing that came to me while I've done a lot of things in my life. I have been a community organizer. I'm an early childhood educator. I've also started teaching, high school students. I've done a lot of things. And I learned that I wanted to make a change out of one of the two ways that you can, which is, policy, which is going into the spaces and doing the protest and doing all of that, or it's changing people's hearts, having those conversations about love, about values, about identity, about what matters to you. And I chose the latter. I had done the former and it took a lot out of me and it was not my strong suit. But once I started deciding, well, I'm going to have these hard conversations because I know I can bring myself to them with a vulnerability and a tenderness and an honesty that some people have trouble having. I can bring that, and I want to have those conversations so that we all learn, right? And we all be better because we know more about ourselves and what we care about.
Right. We're juxtaposing this idea of, in my mind, hard. And then I'm watching you, and there's like this bounce in your step. There's this energy there. And so that in my mind immediately says, wait a minute, these two things, the way I think of them categorically, hard and excitable energy, aren't living together. And that means there's a perception problem that I've got going on here. It can't just be me, because I feel this all the time, is like when we need to reflect and move on and expand that consciousness. Why is there maybe an aversion to something like that in the way we think about it?
I think it is human nature to want comfortability, to want to be settled and comfortable and cozy. And growing is the opposite of that, right? It is movement. It requires an expanding, right? And so I think it's really hard because we want to think that we've got it all. There's a piece I wrote once that was like, I used to think that my experience was a monolith. Like, I think that I did it. And that means that I know how everything works. But the tricky thing is, when we challenge that, we actually become better, but it requires intention. And I think sometimes we spend our days working hard. Right. I think the majority of the people in our society work really, really hard, which means sometimes it's hard then, after a long day of work, to go home and go, now I'm going to be intentional about how I'm going to personally grow, how I'm going to expand my mind and my values to make sure that they're refined to the level that I want them to be. It's not easy. And it also then requires you to have conversations with maybe people that you didn't want to have conversations with, or people you're scared of or intimidated. Or for me, it's sometimes having conversations with people who have hurt you, right? Who are in opposition to you kind of in a very clear way. That's not fun, right? And in the simplest sense, but growing can be so beautiful. So then we step up to it. But it makes sense. I never fault someone for wanting to be comfortable. I fault someone when they realize growth can be really beautiful and then they still choose not to have it. That's when I start going, hey, right, I'm not sure we have the same values. Like, I don't know if we can be best friends if you don't see the beauty in growth. I understand the not wanting to do it. That's the same thing that we tell our young kids of, I know you don't want to brush your teeth twice a day, right? I know you don't want to do these things, but there's a way that we garner ourselves and foster ourselves to be the best versions of ourselves.
There's so many things in that make me think like, okay, to do that requires a certain level of vulnerability. But I just think that you're right. This has a lot to do with what we're willing to put ourselves through intentionally. And it is easier sometimes for me to be non-intentional. Go home, crash it out.
Absolutely. Yeah, to relax. And I want to be clear that we earn that sometimes. Those days where we go home and we sit on that couch and we veg for a while. We earn that. That's real. That's also necessary. It's when the balance is off. It's when we're not balancing the growth with it as well.
To me, too, this has everything in my mind to do with identity. In a lot of your work that I'm seeing, I'm watching, I'm reading, it feels like it's right there. It's a very visceral experience. So I'm curious to know, in your mind, how does identity play into this kind of push-pull of who we are?
That's a good question. Identity is the lens in which we see everything. And so the better you understand your own identity, the better you're able to know what you need from other people. That's one thing that I think a lot of my poems end up tackling, is as I'm tackling my own Blackness, for example, I'm trying to figure out what it is that I want to say to the people who don't respect, love, or appreciate Black people. I need to then know my own identity in order to tell them, hey, this is how I would hope you see me, right? Hey, this is what I actually am. And then on the other side, it's recognizing your identity in ways that is wrapped up in privilege. It's wrapped up in problems and systems that back up maybe some negative things. Some of the things I also try to tackle is being a feminist as a man an intersectional feminist is a really tough thing to be, because that means I have to look at my own identity in the ways that I fall short. But when we start having these conversations about identity, we start realizing ways that we can show compassion to the identities we don't have, and how we can better support the identities we do hold, right? How we can love ourselves along with the people who have that same identity. And that's the love we want, right? Like,
yeah, it's a great way to look at it, because I think that like it forces you then to actually, when you think about identity, to think about the component pieces of that identity, right? And this is like an inventory, or I think a consideration or reconsideration. And I want to step back to play a poem that you had written so we can look at this specifically.
Mike, an old white man, looks me in my eyes and asks me why Black men don't want to be good dads. I feel my breath catch. My fingers curl into a fist, every muscle in my body begging to answer with might, with fight. See, there's this home video where my dad is lying on the couch, 6-month-old me on his chest, and I start to cry. He lifts me up, gives me a gentle kiss on the cheek, and holds me upright with a shh. With my feet planted on his chest and his hands holding me upright, he's doing everything he can to keep the hunger at bay, to keep me calm. And now I watch home videos and wonder what little Black boys are supposed to do when there's no one there to hold them up when the hunger gets to be too much. See, I've never met a Black man who wanted to be a bad dad, but plenty that didn't know how to be anything else. Either absent or abusive, they fall short of fatherhood into teachers of trauma. See, my dad's dad worked hard, but sometimes hit hard too. A Southern man better understood by his hands, he raised 5 kids this way. And on the day that he raises his fist to his wife, my dad jumps on his dad's back, all lightweight and lanky, pounding fists against father, because my dad knows what's worth fighting for. See, my dad taught me what's worth fighting for. So on my 16th birthday, when I'm crying in bed because my girlfriend is carrying our baby inside of her like an unexpected gift, I find the strength to tear up the receipt. No returning to cinder. I will fight for this fatherhood. And even though God's postal service permanently delayed that delivery, I can tell you with complete certainty that I would have died fighting for the title, Good Dad.
Man.
I got to tell you, I very rarely re-listen to my work, like just make myself sit and listen. And that was really a lot.
I mean, it pulls me back into a place that like it's out of the order of time. And in my head, I'm sitting there listening because as you know, I've got 2 kids and I'm working through, trying to expand whatever was left of this consciousness when I've got it. Right. But there's in your work, I hear so much tension between these forces of was and is and will be, and as someone's son, grandson there, and, potentially someone else's father, how in the world do you navigate the tremendous pull of these forces?
It is not easy in the simplest phrase, but it requires a lot of reflection. It requires a lot of honesty. The thing is, I am constantly thinking about who I am and who I want to be. And I can't ignore what's been brought to me, right? What's been poured into me already. And I think that's a lot of what this poem is about, right? Is my grandfather pour into my dad, right? And that affected and influenced my dad in very distinct ways. That then he took whatever mixture he made there and then poured that into me. And that means that I'm still part of what my granddad has brought, but I'm mixed with what my dad has brought me. And there is something special about the fact that I have that. And then I still get to bring my own mix, right? It's still my job and my privilege to take the things that have been poured into me and mix something that I want to make. And so I get to take the fight that my dad has. I get to take that righteousness that I think my dad carries, with still also the tenderness and understanding that my dad's dad was trying to be the best dad he could be. And I don't get to have any fallacy, any lies to myself that my lineage is beautiful and perfect. right? It is beautiful and very imperfect. And I get to know that and move forward with an honesty that's very different than if I told myself every dad in my lineage has been great. All the men in my family are perfect. That's a very different conversation than going, I get to take some of the ugly and some of the beautiful and decide what I'm going to make with it. And then also know that even with all the things that I've got, there are still things that I don't control, right? And there are still things that I won't be able to influence as much as I want to. And so I don't know, that's a ramble on that poem a bit, but that is one of my favorite poems, and a poem that I was afraid to write. I was very much wanted to talk about the conversation I had with Mike right at the beginning of that poem, but I didn't know that poem was going to go there when I was writing it, that I was going to go into being honest and reflective on my family.
I can't get away from this fact of, with my two young sons, that what am I pouring into them, in that intentionality that you had said earlier. But then this idea that, once in a while, the voice that I hear is actually me talking to myself. And then I start to think about, where do we put something like healing in all of this conversation?
And I think healing is so funny because it is one of the scariest things. When we are outside of it, we are very scared of it. We want it, and yet we are terrified because it requires that jump over the hard stuff, over the hard conversations, or the looking yourself in the mirror and being like, was that the right choice? Or am I being honest about this? And those are the things that scare us the most. And yet we desperately need that healing. And I always think healing is almost like a practice. We get better and more used to that hurdle that gets us into healing, the more we do it. Because what happens is we jump into that healing and go, all right, I can recognize that this is a better end, right? This was the better place to be. So the next time we hit a hurdle, we're more willing to do that. It's a very intimidating thing to do, though, right? to be honest. And to sometimes be honest and have other people be honest with us. I've sat down with people that I think I wasn't my best self with and said, hey, can we talk about, like, if you have the space and the emotional capacity, can we talk about kind of what I did wrong here and how I could be better? And I'm going to be honest, I at the time was doing my best, as I almost always am. But that doesn't mean I was great. Can you be real with me? What could I have done here? Right. Or like to be honest, like point me in the right direction because I want to be there.
You just inverted the way I think about hard conversations, because all of a sudden I'm thinking, okay, so hard conversation is when you go to others to say, hey, I got to talk about what you were like, not going to others to say, hey, I got to talk about what I was like. It challenges the notion of, like, when you open your mouth to have a hard conversation, it's, I need to tell you something.
Yes. It's very easier to point out. Right. But I've found my biggest growth has been when I've asked people to point it and like to help me. And I'm pointing and going, I wasn't the best here. And it's terribly hard. And also because a lot of the times when we are driven to growth, sometimes it's out of the hurt that we have, right? Our own hurt. And therefore we want to push that out, right? We want to talk about what's out there that hurt us. The thing is oftentimes, and we know this, right? That hurt people, right? We know this. And so often I'm trying to figure out where my hurt is in all of this, what my hurt is doing here. And by doing so, it often opens up the conversation for that other person to name their hurt, right? And to name what was influencing the not so great choices they made, right? The negative things that did affect me. It usually opens that up because if you're willing to name you're wrong, if you're willing to say, hey, I'm vulnerable here, then they will match you most often. There are some people who won't, and I want to be honest about that. Right. But there are plenty of people. A lot of my difficult conversations, I sit with my palms up and my hands out. It's a physical thing to remind myself that I am going to be open here. Like I am going to be vulnerable. I'm not going to cross my arms. I'm not, and I move with my hands a lot. Mm-hmm. When it's the hardest moments, I'm unclenching my fist. I'm opening my palms up. And they might be in my lap. I won't always make it so ceremoniously, but like my physical reminder of going, I'm going to be open here.
What do you then do? And you mentioned this before, and you reference this in your poem. What do you do then with anger?
And I will tell you, that's a journey that I've been on of learning how to accept, appreciate, and know that anger is okay. It's how we express it, right? And what we do with that anger. Because there is righteous anger out there. And even if it's not righteous, sometimes that anger comes from something that and is telling us something. And we need to be able to recognize that. So my relationship with anger is really tricky because it requires me to be more aware of myself when I'm angry, which is so hard because we know scientifically things are activated, right? Like things are going that make it really hard for you to think clearly. And so it's being able to better recognize when anger is growing and going, all right, what are my techniques? For me, it's breathing, right? Like I'm a big breathing exercise person. If I can feel it happening inside of me, I have to breathe. It's not in that poem, but what happens after, my fingers clench and I want to, fight Mike for asking me the question, why Black men don't want to be good dads, is I actually step away from the conversation and I breathe for a while. Then I come back and I answer his question. I go, Mike, I need a minute. And I step away because I am so angry with this man who's looking me in the eye, saying something that I think is so outrageous and so frustrating that I had to step away. I take a breath and I come back, and then I'm able to talk through this whole experience with him. But our goal is to understand when we're having anger, so that then we can channel it the right way, which is to still have it, which still might be that you need to go to a boxing gym and punch a bag. Like that's okay, right? As long as it's not hurting other people, as long as it's not doing things that wrong and violate other people's safety and security and all of that. Have your anger. There's a moment where anger speaks its own language that we have to listen to. And that's an okay language. I think anger is almost a secondary emotion. It almost always comes from something else. And so that anger is great. It's a great flare in the sky saying there is something here that needs to be addressed. And then if you follow that trail down, you get to the land and the ground and the real reality of what's happening here. And there's a whole lot less fire and a whole lot more of an issue that needs to be addressed. Someone's hurt, right? Someone's in need there. And that's what anger can do and function as. And I have learned to really respect that.
Yeah. It has been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. I've loved this combo. These are the conversations we've got to have.
Wasn't hard at all, by the way.
Well,
if people want to learn more about you and your work, where can they go?
Absolutely. My website, thenegroartist.com, or, social media. I'm really big on Instagram. So that's _Negro artist, THE_NEGROARTIST. And those are the best ways to keep track of what I'm doing, seeing my work. And from there, you can also follow any of my other platforms and find me doing whatever else that I'm doing.
Caleb Rainey, everybody.
This poem is a raging riot. Set fire to your precincts, your clan's sanctuary, steal every piece of life from Target so that our deaths will be decked out in the decor of what's always been on our backs, because didn't we always own Target? Weren't we already fresh to death? Isn't that an oxymoron, like being black in America? Like this poem? Like expecting what you deserve from people who benefit from your death? I will not play peace as you play war. So these words will press down on your perspective so your bigotry cannot breathe. It will choke out every bit of privilege until you are called out for your mama, and I will watch the ignorance fade from your eyes. Because I refuse to write another obituary. I have run out of words for grief. There's only room for anger now. It's the only thing that stops the crying. The backbone holding me upright when the world wants me face down on the ground. I'd rather die than live this way. So if I must die, let me die fighting.
Many thanks to the Samuel P. Hunt Foundation for sponsoring this podcast. Established in 1951, Samuel P. Hunt Foundation is a Manchester-based, independent nonprofit that provides grants primarily for the arts, children and youth services, faith-based organizations, educational institutions, healthcare, and human services. This podcast was brought to you by Nixon Peabody, who delivers exceptional legal services for clients in the community by combining high performance, an entrepreneurial spirit, deep engagement, and an unwavering commitment to a culture of collaboration, diversity, and humanity. Nixon Peabody works with universities, hospitals, and nonprofits of every size to maximize impact. For more information, visit nixonpeabody.com. New Hampshire Family Now is listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and more. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or ask your smart speaker to play New Hampshire Family Now.